that they're having this connection with Congress. It's not to help me, it is, or anybody else who's buying Lipitor, or anybody in the middle class. They're really trying to make sure that the pharmaceutical companies make a lot of money and keep their money. Isn't that true? That it's sort of an unfair, uneven playing field.
Well, I think we would all agree that we have to guard against any sort of rent-seeking on the part of political interest groups when it comes to our government. We got to guard against that every possible way we can, and it's always going to be a risk. But I would say...
But that's lobbying in general, right?
But when you look at the micro, you see a lot of lobbying going on back and forth between all sorts of interest groups. When you step up to the macro, let's look at the two most important issues. Taxes. In the U.S., the top 1% is paying a much higher percentage of the taxes than they are in Europe and Japan. And if you look at government services, it's true that Europe is providing more government services than the U.S., but they're largely doing that by taxing the middle class, not by taxing the top 1%. So it's hard to make the argument that at a macro level, on the two most important issues which we're fighting about in this election, government services, that somehow the rich in the United States have been able to use their clout to do something that hasn't been done in Europe and Japan.
Do you think that the people who are talking about income inequality are just wrong-headed, that there's not income inequality? I mean, Governor Romney, when asked about that by Matt Lauer on NBC, I'll play a little bit of what he said, then I'll ask you on the other side. Okay.
You know, I think it's about envy. I think it's about class warfare. I think when you have a president encouraging the idea of dividing America based on 99% versus 1%, and those people who have been most successful will be in the 1%, you've opened up a whole new wave of approach to this country, which is entirely inconsistent with the concept of one nation under God. Yeah, and the American people, I believe, in the final analysis will reject it.
Are there no fair...
Do you think that that's true, that the conversation about income inequality is really one where the 99%, the people who are not in the super rich category, are really just envious?
Well, I wouldn't use the word envious. I guess I think the best of people, so I don't want to think, I don't like to think that. But I would say this, that if you don't see that the economy has changed from the 1950s to where it is today, very much based on risk-taking and innovation, you scratch your head and wonder why income inequality has increased. And if you don't see the reason why, then you start to come up with other reasons, and you say, geez, maybe it's just been a fortuitous aligning of the stars, which has allowed the top 1% to get more income today than they would have in the past. You don't see the real underlying economic reasons.
Or maybe there's sort of a non-level playing field, that the wealthier are allowed to become wealthier because I think people feel this way, that there are certain regulations in Congress, sometimes it's the tax system, that help the wealthier keep their money and make more money, and that the middle class at the same time feels like they're squeezed and they're not actually being helped out by the very Congress they have worked to elect.
Yeah, and I give you a different interpretation, which is that in most cases, and there's always lucky cases to be sure, find it on as a whole, the top 1% here is earning and producing more in the United States than they are in Europe and Japan. We have a very rich set of unrealized investment opportunities. I go back to Google, Facebook, Intel, you name it. And all of that innovation has come from the United States. Europe and Japan stand in stark contrast. And so when you see this difference between today and the 1950s, I think you're really asking the question, which is, do we need these high payoffs to motivate the risk-taking that's producing innovation? And when we look at the micro examples, when state lotteries go up, for example, we know that people start buying a lot of lottery tickets. When internet valuations rose in 2000, we know that a lot of people walked away from their jobs to try to create internet startups. We know that when real estate prices rose in the 2006, 2007, a lot of entrepreneurs started working on fixing up real estate to try to make money. So we know that those payoffs do motivate increased risk-taking. And if if Europe and Japan had produced a similar level of innovation with much lower payoffs, we could certainly be having this debate about whether the payoffs are necessary. But we stand in stark contrast to Europe and Japan.
You're arguing for the 1% in a world that's having kind of I think, a country at an election year that's having a fight over the 99% versus the 1%. Yes. Do you worry that this book is not going to help your former boss, Mitt Romney? Because a lot of people, don't even, I see them on Wall Street, they're like, oh, I don't want to even see the protesters that occupy Wall Street. They don't feel like that's a good thing to be part of the 1%. Do you think your book could hurt him politically?
I think there's always a risk. Just coming on TV is a risk for everybody, right? It's a risk for Bain, it's a risk for Mitt, it's a risk for me. But I would say this, that when serious economists have read the book, on the left and the right, Nouriel Roubini, for example, you can read him on the back cover.
Harvard, yes,
you can read him in the New York Times piece, which is intentionally trying to be as incendiary as possible.
And he has disagreed with some of what you said in your book.
Yeah, but he also agrees that it's a very seriously and thought-provoking and well-considered explanation of the economy, even though he disagrees with it.
Doesn't necessarily answer the political question, but I get your point. Nice nice to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.